Are food labels accurate?
Don't you want to look good naked?
When it comes to food labels or nutrition labels that you see on the back of a packaged food, there can actually be a margin of error for that the FDA allows. So food labels can actually be up to, I think it's about 20% inaccurate or variable between the macronutrients, so the carbs, fats, and protein, and also the calories. So if your goal is fat loss, for example, and you're relying on a lot of packaged and processed foods, that's one issue, right? How accurate are you actually tracking if we know that those food labels can be, different from about 20%, whether that's up or down? One thing to think about. The second thing to think about that doesn't have to do with food labels, but if you're eating a ton of processed and packaged foods, we have to understand that when it comes to our body's way of actually digesting and absorbing the food or the nutrients from those packaged foods, it's usually a much less energy taxing process. What I mean by that is that our body takes more energy and actually more calories to physically break down whole foods, right? So when I say whole foods, that's anything that's either had a face at some point or have grown from the earth at some point. So you can think had a face at some point would be meat, right? Meat, fish, eggs, came from a chicken. Dairy is considered in that category depending on how processed it is, but that will come from obviously a cow. And then anything that grew from the earth at some point, so think like your vegetables and your fruits. Those are more so those whole foods. And so if we are thinking about whole foods versus processed foods, whole foods are going to take more energy and fuel to actually break down and absorb versus the processed foods are actually going to be pretty much pre-processed for your body to absorb. So you're literally taking less energy to break down the processed food versus the whole food. So if we put those two things together, right? If we put the inaccuracy from the food labels plus your body actually not expending as much energy to break down that processed food, then you're really just putting yourself in a position to make that fat loss harder. So I recommend, if your goal is to lose body fat as efficiently as possible and also be your healthiest self, focus about 80-ish% of your day on those whole foods, had a face at some point or grew from the earth at some point. Not saying you can't incorporate any of those processed foods, but I would say stick to around like that 20%-ish or even less. So think about that 80-20 rule. 80% whole foods, 20% maybe more of the processed foods. If you want to get even more diligent, think about maybe 90-10. And again, this is just going to make your life easier and make your calorie deficit or your fat loss phase a lot more efficient. Something else that you want to realize about food labels is not only in the inaccuracy of the macros or the calories, but some companies will actually try to trick you, especially when it comes to carbs and fiber. So a great example of this is if you've ever had a low carb tortilla or you've seen one of those carb balance or low carb tortillas in the grocery store, you might flip the package over and see, oh, there's only 100 calories on this, and you're looking at the macronutrients. And if you actually add those macronutrients up, the fat, carbs, and protein, you'll actually notice that they subtract the fiber from the calories that they put on the label. So this might take a little bit of math, but next time you go in the grocery store, pick up one of those low carb wraps and do the math yourself. And the way you do the math, it's pretty easy. You just take the carbs, fat, and protein that you see on the label, and you'll multiply the protein by 4. So there's 4 calories per gram of protein, there's 4 calories per gram of carbs, and 9 calories per gram of fat. So if you have a certain amount of grams of fat, protein, and carbs on that label, just multiply those. So with your fat, say you have, for example, 3 grams of fat, I'm gonna multiply 3 times 9, I'll get that number. If it's protein, say I have 4 grams of protein, I'll multiply 4 times 4, I'll get that number. And then same with carbs, say it's like 25 grams of carbs, multiply that number by 4, and I'll have that number. Then I add those all up, and that's what your calories are. So just do some math yourself. You can probably even just Google that and make it a lot easier. But compare the math that you get from adding up those individual macronutrients to the calories that the label shows. And I bet you that a lot of those products, especially things like low carb products or keto products, there's a lot of gray area there because they'll subtract out the fiber and the sugar alcohols. What you want to pay attention to is that everybody processes these fiber and these sugar alcohols a little bit differently. So although the company might say, oh, you're not going to absorb any of this fiber, you won't absorb any of these sugar alcohols, everybody is different. So you may actually be absorbing some of that fiber, absorbing those sugar alcohols and not even realizing it. So calories count, fiber counts, just don't get caught up in that with the things that you see in the store. Make sure that you're being strategic about the things that you're picking and just educate yourself, right? That's the biggest thing. Women, we believe